Hey there, I am Dr. Amy King, otherwise known as Dr. Amy, and this podcast is The Most Important Medicine. If you're a physician or healthcare provider, this podcast is for you. This is where we learn about trauma-informed medicine and ways to build resilience in healthcare organizations. We do this through your stories and the stories of other professionals and people. We listen to transform medicine with compassion and curiosity about what it means to be a trauma-informed practice or provider. Every time you join me, I want you to hear practical information and leave with tangible tools you can use with patients right away. Today, I'm talking with a special guest, Daum. Daum is the co-editor in book Parenting with PTSD, The Impact of Childhood Abuse on Parenting. She is the mother of two, has an adverse childhood experience score of 9, and has spent nearly 20 years working in the trenches of our mental health system. Daum is currently the program director for Milestone Manor, a recovery home in Saratoga Springs, New York. Previous to that, she provided ICM and Health Home care management services to adults living with mental illness in the community. She entered her career in the field as a mental health inpatient tech and a child and youth residential counselor. Daum uses both her personal and professional experience to write, speak, and facilitate conversation about trauma-informed systemic change. Her mission is to help shift the culture's understanding of what it means to recalibrate and heal the mind and body from trauma. Wow, we are like-minded souls, Daum. I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you. I really appreciate the invitation to be here. I'm happy to be here and talk on this topic.
Yeah, wonderful. Well, that's kind of your formal introduction. Anything else you want to say about your introduction, who you are, or what you do?
I'm a mom, like you said, two kids. My son is 10 now, and my daughter's 13. So both very fun and very challenging ages. Life is pretty busy with work and with kids, but in my spare time, I try to just I'm soaking up the rest of the sun. The summer we have here is definitely coming to an end. So just trying to get outdoors and take advantage of the fresh air while we can before we're all cooped up inside. That's about it. Life, work, kids.
Well, I know that you recently co-wrote a book, and we're going to dive into that. But let me back up and ask you a question that I ask or try to ask all of my guests, which is, how would you define trauma?
Trauma for me, I think of it much more in the context of what it does to individuals as they are developing now, more than I ever did before. I think of trauma as a physical, not so much the event that happened, but the physical and mental reactions we have to those experiences, and how that both affects how we develop initially as children, particularly when the trauma occurs when we're young, but also the ripple effect that has well into adulthood, and particularly once we become parents, how it can take our mind and body back to a time and place where it kind of muddles the water for current experiences.
Yeah. Wonderful example. On this podcast, we talk about how trauma intersects in the field of medicine. And I know before we hit record today, we were kind of talking offline about your experience as the program director. Tell us a little bit more about, the types of patients and clients you serve at Milestone Manor and how you see the intersection of trauma come up there.
99% of the population that live in the community residence that I run have trauma. Actually, I say 99, but it's really 100%. These individuals, I work with an adult population, so 18 and up, all have mental health diagnoses. Most have substance use disorder diagnoses and physical health ailments. there's very rarely an occasion where someone comes in who cannot be taught how to acquire the skills to live independently in the community. And that is the on paper overall goal, right? We want to get these individuals to a place where they can function in a way that they know how to take care of themselves in independent living.
Mhm.
It sounds simple, but it's really not, because what happens is most individuals have the skills to take care of themselves. They can do dishes, they can, they can cook a meal, but it's the experiences that have traumatized their minds and bodies to be able to prioritize self-care in addition to that gets in the way, and they don't have sustainable ways of taking care of themselves. And so we do a lot of work at our house around repair.
Mhm.
We know that, when people experience trauma early on, it affects their ability to reason, to plan. Planning, actually, for me, I have found is one of the key ingredients to help people rewire, because without the ability to plan ahead, a lot of individuals self-sabotage. They put themselves in risky situations. And so we spend a lot of time both helping individuals step out of the moments when they're triggered, think ahead, plan ahead, get to the root of what is causing the physical ailments, what's leading them to want to use. It's that urge that just so many individuals have to both stuff and to mask what it is that they're living with.
Absolutely.
And
Yeah.
unfortunately, it doesn't get brought up enough in other arenas of their lives to where they feel like it has anything to do with their current situation.
Mhm. I mean, I talk a lot about this with healthcare providers, Dawn, which is if someone's using substances, we have such a huge judgment around their character and who they are as people, but really they're just trying to cope with atrocities and really painful experiences in the only way that maybe they know how or that they have access to.
Mhm. We spend a significant amount of time teaching people and coaching people to be able to sit in discomfort,
Mhm.
because it really is that ability to sit in discomfort that helps you unlearn
Mm.
uh, things that have gotten in the way, barriers in their lives in the past, and relearn uh, how to move through them. And it doesn't, shut you completely down. And learning how to do that without necessarily turning to medication to do it. Not that medication does not help. I am not an opponent of medication by any means. But so many of these individuals, a lot of them since they were very young, have been put in these categories of diagnoses
Yes.
and sent home with medication to fix it, with no real investigation or curiosity about what's at the root of it.
Oh,
Um, One of my favorite populations to work with is those diagnosed with borderline personality disorder. And it is the hardest
mhm.
because of the level of dysregulation that these individuals, live with. But I get to work with individuals in their home setting.
Mhm.
So it's easier to help them get a sense of safety, build relationship, and get them curious about what's underneath, why their relationships are so disruptive, why they can't seem to get better, why they, and undo a lot of that language that is thrown at them for most of their lives, manipulative behavior, all that sort of just language that gets stuck to them without any real explanation as to why they do those sort of things. What need are they trying to get met?
Yes.
And teach them how to get that need met, just with in a different way, something that serves them now.
Mhm.
What served them in the past isn't working anymore, so we want to give them the skills they need to get through these moments without returning to those ways that are putting them at risk or causing them harm.
Wow. I mean, there's so much that I hope listeners are pulling from what you're saying. I hope they're just taking copious notes, because so many things that you're saying in terms of being curious about what's underneath the behavior. I love what you said a minute ago. When we sit with discomfort, it helps us unlearn that trauma response that we may have gone to in the past that's no longer working for us. Can you tell us, do you have a story of someone you've worked with, of course, protecting their information, but where they really were able to learn that skill of sitting with discomfort so that they could choose or engage in a different behavior?
So the first example that came to mind really was, we try to have purpose around any rule that we have in our house, right? So an opportunity, it's good. It's my goal to have it be an opportunity to practice. And an example of that would be, so dinner is served at 5:30 every evening. Residents, we do a family style dinner, and that's on purpose. We have a recommendation that everybody sit at the table for at least 15 minutes, whether they eat or not. This may sound strange, but the purpose behind that is so many individuals have food insecurities. They have food and eating issues when they come in. They also have possibly negative memories and experiences sitting around a dinner table or never sitting around a dinner table.
Agree. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So it's uncomfortable for a lot of folks.
Mm-hmm.
By having them sit at the table for 15 minutes
Mm-hmm.
and just be able to realize nothing is happening to put them in danger in that minute. And in fact, it's actually inviting the opportunity to have conversation with folks while in discomfort, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
It really retrains the brain in that moment. They're not cognizant of it most of the time,
Mm-hmm.
but that's what's actually happening. And after a period of time, that becomes something that most folks look forward to is
Yeah.
dinner.
And once they've had 15, 20 dinners like that, where there's not disruption, where there's not abuse, where there's a positive experience sitting together in community and eating, now their brain starts to rewire, is what you're saying.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I think that often when we talk about what it means to be trauma informed, or what it means, like you said, to recalibrate and heal the mind, we think that it has to be these like fancy interventions. And really what you're saying is like the normal rhythms of life, right? Like having a meal together, sitting down and kind of unlearning what it might have felt like before to eat a meal together, and relearning how it can feel safe, that those kinds of simple and straightforward ways are the key.
Yeah, I tell folks when I'm first doing an intake with them, when I'm first meeting them, I take that opportunity to try to introduce myself and let them tell me their story versus just going through intake paperwork, diagnoses, and the information that they're used to being like the most important stuff. And it's not. It's really not. It's how did what happened to you? How is that affecting you today? And one of the questions I ask is, do you have something that you do that's no longer serving you? An example, an obvious example is substance use, or alcohol, using alcohol or whatever. And at that point, I tend to tell them, honesty is the framework of this program. We'll tell people you won't get kicked out for using a substance, but you will get discharged for not using staff, right? That's what we're there for. Okay. We have a harm reduction approach. We want you to be able to practice coming in and telling a truth and experiencing the world not falling apart around you.
That has to be life-changing for people, right? I want to reiterate, you said you won't be in trouble for using substances, but you will be in trouble if you're not using the relationships that will help you heal.
Yes. Yeah.
Wow.
That's
Wow.
a big one. It's a big one. And it is so hard for people. So hard for people. For most of them, they've had to use different shades of dishonesty to get their needs met and stay safe most of their lives, even with providers.
Mhm.
You know, for a lot of folks who have been in and out of particularly substance use services, if they're honest, sometimes they're closed. Sometimes that means they don't really want it. It honesty is not their friend. It
Yes.
oftentimes backfires.
Mhm.
And not to say that there aren't consequences for our actions, but they also need to know that that is not going to serve them in the long run. You
Mhm.
know,
Mhm.
and it's a safe place to come into the office and shut the door and use honesty, use vulnerability and curiosity to stop the cycle.
Mm. You obviously come from a place of deep compassion and empathy.
Yeah.
And I know that writing this book has been a big game changer for you.
Mhm.
Can you tell our listeners a little bit about how you came to write this book and talk about your journey? Tell us a little bit about your story.
Sure. So, for context, before the book was written, I had decided to become a stay-at-home mom. My son was 3 months old. At the end of my maternity leave, I just decided I don't want to go back. My daughter was 3.5 at the time, and I was very fortunate enough to be in a situation where I could make that decision. Um, so because I'm now home, I'm in the midst of motherhood, right? 24/7.
Mhm.
Uh, Started to go a little loopy with not having anything that was stimulating my brain, right? So I started a blog, and it really kind of started out as just a fun way for me to tell stories about the kids and connect with other people.
Is that blog still up somewhere, Dawn?
It's not as active as I wish it was.
Okay.
However, yeah, the blog was WTF, Words, Thoughts, Feelings. Um,
We'll link up to it in the show notes. Okay.
okay. So what started to happen though was I started to get a little bit more real and honest and raw in my writing and talking about my experiences with depression, anxiety,
Mhm.
particularly as I started to become a mom. And I noticed, you know, I was spiraling in and out of these depressive states quite frequently, and I couldn't really figure out why.
Mhm.
Um, I started to notice I was having physical symptoms as I was caring for my kids, very basic acts of parenthood, um, changing diapers, breastfeeding, bathing or dressing my children. I can remember one particular incident where my daughter was about 6 at the time. And when I would go into her room at night to tuck her in, give her a kiss on the forehead, like I always done, it was almost like the minute I walked into her room, I would get nauseous.
Mm.
I was, and I didn't understand it, but there was this like jolt of get out of there. Um, when I would breastfeed, I would have an enormous amount of intrusive thoughts
Mhm.
and flashbacks.
Mhm.
And this all became very overwhelming for me. It got worse with headaches. I was having severe pain in my hips. I got diagnosed with arthritis in my hips at age 30.
Mhm.
Um, I had no idea what was going on, but I knew something was going on. So,
Can I ask you a question? Because we were talking
yeah.
about, physicians and healthcare. Did anybody ask you about trauma at that point? Did you, or did you tell your pediatrician or any of your physicians about these intrusive thoughts? I mean, like from a healthcare perspective, who knew and did you know?
Yeah. I wish I would have said something. B, I wish I would have been asked.
Mm,
Because no, I didn't. I went to the doctor about my hip. Obviously, I got the diagnosis, right? I went to lactation specialist because I couldn't I couldn't produce enough milk, and it was stressing me out. And the response I got was just relax, just breathe. And actually, when I went there, nurses, I love nurses, and especially ones that work with in the arena of like post birth and stuff like that. They're just so blunt, and they're so so I'm getting grabbed and put them here, all these eh, you know and my son was he was drinking, like I was nursing. It was a good day, I should say, right? So the lactation specialist was kind of confused. She was like, I don't really understand what's going on. In my mind, I was like, it was pure chaos. It was like I wanted to tell her that, like, I don't think, like, my body, I think it's doing what it's supposed to do, but I'm having such a visceral reaction to it that I think that's what's causing it. And I don't know why. I know it's connected to what I have experienced, my trauma, because I'm having flashbacks. I'm having these intrusive thoughts that I can't say that I definitely laid to rest, but I had done a lot of work on myself. I was 28 when I decided to have children, and that was on purpose because I wanted to be the kind of mom that I wanted to be, and I knew in order to do that, I needed to seek therapy. I needed to work through this stuff, right? So, I wish I would have spoken up and told them what was. I wish I would have let them see the inside as I was seeing the outside, like that my insides matched my outsides, because I wasn't painting that picture. Perfectionism, the mask, all that sort of thing is something that I was very good at.
yeah.
uh,
I want to pause for a second because I have goosebumps when you say, I wish I would have said something and I wish someone would have asked. I think whether you're a lactation consultant, right, who you were talking about, kind of post baby, or your pediatrician or nurse or a family practice doc or whoever's interacting with a new mom in that instance, right? I think there's this fear of asking, Dawn, because they don't want to like impose on you, or they don't want to trigger you, or they don't want to burden you, or they're not sure what to do, if they ask a question. Can you speak to that at all? That desire to be, it would have made it so much easier, it sounds like, if someone had asked.
yeah. I love talking about this because in my own professional experience, when I tried to, kind of get people on board with asking these kinds of questions, there's such a pushback. It's like, no, stay in your lane. You can't do that. You're going to upset people. We don't have resources to calm them down. That trauma can of worms is already opened, and it's already exploding all the time.
Yes.
Right. So, like, asking is actually giving someone permission to talk about how they're already feeling.
Yes.
And I don't think that you are ever going to see somebody so triggered that they start flailing on the ground and you can't handle it.
Mm-hmm.
Typically, what I see when I am in a position where I can delicately open that door for someone is relief. Sometimes it's fears on board too.
Of course.
But it's more relief and whew, and at ease. I remember when I first talked to my primary care doctor about wanting to start a family, and I was concerned because I was taking an antidepressant, and I had that conversation with her. Do you think I should continue to take them? Should I go off? And she was great. She was very open to the conversation. about, she would help me make the choice of whichever choice was right for me. And, but in hindsight, I wish she would have had the knowledge about trauma, because I don't know, based on any of our previous interactions, and even still to this day, if she did.
Yeah.
But I wish she did, so that she maybe would have said, just so you're aware, as you become a parent, as your body starts to change with pregnancy, all of it, the whole package, you're going to be up against a new set of triggers.
Absolutely.
You
Yeah.
know, there was none of that. There was talk about medication. There was talk about take care of yourself.
Mhm.
There was never any conversation or questions about my history with trauma.
Mm.
And whether or not that may or may not come into play.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. I mean, I think about every OBGYN or family practice doctor, for instance, who have how many moms on their, in their cases that have ACE scores similar to yours, right? Who just want to be asked, want to be validated, want to be educated. Hey, with your body changing and having babies and becoming a mom, you might get a whole new set of triggers based on your history. And I want to support you and make sure you have appropriate resources so that we can walk on this path together. I mean, the way you said it is such a beautiful script. And that took you 10 seconds to say, hey, there might be this stuff that's going to come up to you based on your trauma history.
Mm-hmm. And if it does, it's okay. It's actually a normal response given your experiences.
Mhm.
If doctors could be supported in helping trauma survivors normalize things that they are likely going to be up against, that would be a game changer.
Yeah.
It would be a game changer, because feeling unnormal, feeling crazy, feeling, holy shit, I shouldn't have done this. I can't do this. I'm feeling like I want to run away from my children more than towards them. That is a layer of shame that clouds everything.
Mm-hmm.
And being able to, or having someone ask you about that, if you have experienced it, don't be surprised if you do. It doesn't mean that it's going to untangle all the work that you've done, or it's going to upend you, or it means anything. It means that you're a bad mom, right?
Yeah, that's what I was thinking, Dawn. Like, just to hear, it doesn't mean you're a bad mom. If you're breastfeeding and being triggered, or if you feel sick when you're walking into your toddler's room, there might be a reason for it. And it's totally normal. It's a trauma response that your body, like you said before, is going right back probably to some of those early moments.
Yeah, when in hindsight, after I started to learn, really my point of change as far as how I viewed trauma was the Nadine Burke-Harris TED Talk.
Mm-hmm.
That changed the trajectory of my life.
Mm-hmm.
And so once I found that, then I started to get way more curious around what is this trauma-informed care? I don't understand what this means, and took just a nosedive for several years to really be able to understand it, both for myself and for those that I serve. Post-traumatic stress disorder was not anything anyone had ever said to me.
Wow. Yeah.
If I brought up my own mental well-being, depression was discussed, anxiety was discussed. PTSD was literally never mentioned to me. And so as I started to experience triggers, it wasn't even in my realm of consciousness that this is what was happening, So and in hindsight, stepping into my daughter's room and feeling nauseous, I know now that started when she was 6, the same age I was when my abuse began.
Yeah. Yeah.
And also I recognize it as a physical, my body's physical response to perceived danger, right?
Yes.
I was putting her in danger.
Yeah.
It's not so much a flashback as it is a flash forward.
Mhm.
It's a moment of thinking, oh my God, I'm causing them harm. Everything I've tried to do to not cause them harm, now I'm causing her harm just by being near her, and it really is a game changer when someone can simply plant a seed of awareness that even if you have worked on your trauma and prior to becoming a parent, once you do, you know you are really coming up against a whole new set of triggers, and the trigger is the child,
Mhm.
and that in itself, knowing that but not understanding it, that's again where so much shame comes in.
Right. It's just loaded with guilt, right? So when you were blogging and this started manifesting, right? Is that kind of what led you into partnering and writing a book about this? Or
Yes, I got a little distracted there,
no,
sorry.
the
So
story, I could talk, I mean, I could talk to you for hours about this. And I think physicians that are listening I know, gaining so much insight into and permission to
mhm,
start asking the questions.
sure.
Yeah, but yeah, I want to hear how the book came to be then.
So I wrote and published an article called Raising a Daughter as a Survivor. And excuse me, instead of just putting it on my blog, I was able to get it published on Scary Mommy,
Oh yeah.
which at the time was huge, right? And so it got a lot of eyes on it. And Joelle was one of those people that read it, and she's a mom in British Columbia, Canada, and reached out to me an email and said, I've never heard anybody talk about this, and I actually just recently went looking for something that did a book, something that talked about this. She referenced when her boys, she had two boys at the time. One of them was going through a hitting phase,
Mhm.
and when he would hit her, she would have that freeze response. And she didn't understand it. And
Mhm.
she didn't know what to do about it, who to tell. Because that's the whole other thing. It's like, who do you tell this stuff to?
Mhm.
So very minimally, we talked back and forth. And then she asked me, do you want to create the resource that we both went looking for?
Ah,
And I was like, yes. It was like one of those whisper moments Oprah talks about, but the universe is just like, here it is, listen. And so that's what we did. And we decided to create an anthology, uh, because much more than any sort of like research that we could find, which, by the way, there's a ton of research and literature out there about child abuse, and there is so much research about parenting and parenting books, but there wasn't anything specific that we could find about the abused child who grows up and now becomes a parent, right? So that was really our angle. We wanted to get mothers and we wanted to get fathers. It was very difficult to get fathers, but we did get a handful in the book. And we specifically asked for stories that these weren't stories written about the traumas that they experienced. It was about how that trauma has now come into their lives again as they've become parents.
mhm.
And what we saw was, it was amazing, because not only were these brave women and men saying things that we were thinking, we were experiencing, um, but they were craving that connection as well. You know, we definitely saw a trend around parenting young children, particularly because there's so much touch involved.
Mhm.
That's what
Yes.
later kind of realized, is that it's that touch. I call it the power and pain of touch.
Mhm.
And again, to go back, when I was saying, like, when I bathe my children, when I do diaper changes, when I breastfeed, all those things, you have to do them. There's no way around it. You have to do them. So you have all this stuff going on. You're still performing these tasks, because it's not that you can't perform them. It's that it makes you sick in a sense when you do, right? And these are supposed to be acts of love and care. And why am I feeling like this when I should be feeling like that? Why, when I changed it, we had one mother who I just thought she was so incredibly brave to say this. She would say when she would change her child's diaper, she felt like she was going to become an abuser.
Yeah.
When something like that, and that's terrifying. And who do
Terrifying
you?
and totally normal. It's terrifying and totally normal. And what you're saying is nobody tells you that.
Oh my gosh, no. And who do you tell? Because that is a scary thing to say. It is a very scary thing to say, for a multitude of reasons. But for someone who is familiar with child family services and mental health services and all that sort of thing, that idea of like mandated reporting and what that may sound like coming out of your mouth, and how that would affect how you might be judged for saying that. Because let me be clear, she wasn't talking about, in the hundreds of mothers that I've talked to who have reiterated exactly what she said, and have said, I would never have been able to say that out loud. Yes. Thank God she said it for me, and I can just say me too. But there's no desire to abuse your child, but there's a fear that you will, just by simply touching them. And so to tell a provider that,
Terrifying. So just let's take a second here, because this is so critically important to do a public service announcement, Dawn, between the two of us, right? If you're a provider and you're creating a space for a mom to be able, or dad or whomever, to be vulnerable enough to say, I had sexual trauma growing up, and now when I change my child's diaper or I'm interacting with them in the bathtub, I have this horrifying fear that I could abuse them. That is not the same as abusing them. It is a fear that is triggered because of your own trauma history, knowing how violating that can feel as a child, that you would never want to do that to your own child. And it's almost like this reckoning in your brain. And this is the way I describe it to survivors of trauma. It's like your brain's trying to reckon, could I do this? How could someone have done this to me? Look at my beautiful child. And it's like your brain trying to process this, wondering like, could I abuse my child the same way? But that is not the same as doing it. But if you can't speak to the fear, then you're left feeling terribly alone.
Yes. And one thing that might happen, and does happen to some parents, is they go into freeze. We talk so much about fight and flight. I don't think there's enough conversation around freeze. And in this context, that can look like neglect.
Okay, say more about that for people that are listening, because I think you're right. And if you're familiar with the polyvagal theory, you may have heard about the freeze response a little bit more. And I think a lot of victims of sexual trauma, physical trauma, emotional trauma, often have enormous guilt around a freeze response. Why didn't you fight? Or even in the moment with their own child, they go into a freeze space that, as a psychologist, I would call that like dissociation, right?
Yeah.
But will you say more about what you heard from these parents' stories about that freeze space?
Definitely. Actually, one thing that comes to mind, I don't know if you've ever heard of the documentary Wrestling Ghosts. It's a story about a 2-year journey of a mother who is a parenting survivor. Anna Jones is the director. Jonas, I believe. Oh, I'm probably saying her name incorrectly.
Okay. We'll put it in the show notes so that we have it. No problem.
There is a scene in this movie where her 2 boys are in the living room, and it's a mess. It's very, it's very messy. The boys are kind of running amok. They're jumping. They're very, someone should probably have an eye on them, right?
Mhm.
She's in her room with her phone sitting on her bed like this. That scene moved me incredibly because I think it captures exactly what I am trying to say. Now, this isn't severe neglect that I'm describing, but it is a form of, it's so noisy in there.
Yes.
Whatever I am saying to them is not calming them down.
Mhm.
I need to just shut down.
Yeah. I'm dysregulated, right?
Completely dysregulated. And instead of what someone may do, go in there and kind of like take charge of the situation, have the boys calm down, help them calm down, right? Nope, she's overstimulated. She is shut down. Her brain has gone offline and she is going to just exit the situation completely. And that can look like,
Neglect. Yeah.
it can look like neglect. And in extreme circumstances, it can become neglect.
Yes.
There, you know, there's a story that I am told about when I was younger. I was removed from the home by age 2. And, you know, there's a story where someone who had come to see me before I was removed, I was dirty. My diaper was hanging, halfway to the floor. And I think about that. And I think about it now in the context of my mother, who had untreated mental illness. There was substance use. There was, a level of violence between her and my father. No doubt I should have been taken better care of. But what a different world mine and hers would have been if somebody would have even had an inkling that it's not that she doesn't know how to change a diaper, right? It's that she's completely disassociating from that role because it makes her physically sick to take care of me,
Mm.
right? So it can look like extreme neglect. It can look like just not paying attention. But it is extremely important, I think, for providers to be able to have the lens to see if this is happening, is it happening because the mother needs support, not teaching her how to, do the logistics of parenting, how to deal with emotionally handling situations where they are providing the care for their child, where they're supposed to be providing the care for their child that they never received, you know?
Mm-hmm. I mean, I'm tearful in thinking about that example, Dawn, of what you just said, like how different things would have been for you and your mom had someone asked, had someone provided her that support, had someone realized that, I've yet in my 23 years of being a psychologist, working with moms, working with caregivers, I've yet to meet a parent who wants to be a bad parent.
Yeah.
And that example is so clear to me, right? Like, had she had the help, the support, the resources, the understanding that she just didn't know how to be engaged with her little girl at that moment.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
it didn't feel safe to her, and it likely felt triggering to her. That's an incredible learning for people, and goes back to your statement you made before, which is, I wish someone had asked what else was going on, especially like you're talking about, like when we look at that lens of neglect and we have such judgment for parents, right? That there's something else going on. Be curious about that. Stay curious, right? You haven't met a mom or a dad who wants to neglect their child. So if we all believe that, then we would be curious as to, I wonder what's happening for that mom to be in that space.
Yeah. Agree. Again, it's allowing curiosity to lead,
Mm-hmm.
without judgment.
Mhm.
you know,
Mhm.
and not having an expectation that everybody who becomes a mom, you know, we get so many messages about, well, it'll just come naturally, you know. Um, I don't care who you are, 90% of this stuff does not come natural, whether you got trauma on board or not.
Amen. I supposedly read all the books, Dawn, and I struggle with parenting every day.
Every day,
Mhm.
every day, you know, and it looks different as your children get older too, you know. When they're young, yes, it's a lot of it is that power and pain of touch, you know, and there's just that constant need. People preach self-care, but you don't have time for self-care, you know. And for a lot of folks who don't have extended family or large, you know, or community, that can send you spiraling. Uh, and then as your kids get older, you're navigating their safety when they're not right in your view, you know, even going to school. Because for most of us who are trauma survivors, specifically survivors of sexual abuse, we are very well aware that uh, most individuals, most perpetrators are someone that we know and trust, right?
Mhm.
So as I am up against this with particularly my daughter who's 13 now, and she's very much, you know, wanting to make her own way and have freedom, learning how to balance freedom and protection is a constant juggle.
Mhm.
Trying not to be overbearing, but trying not to also uh, not give too much freedom for fear. You know, it's a constant balancing act, and checking in with myself and asking, is this a normal parenting thing, or are there triggers going on? It's really being able to tune into my body and figuring out where that fear that I'm feeling right now as she's asking me to do this is coming from.
Yeah.
Where is it coming from? Is it coming from um a place where I'm fearful of her safety? Or is it I'm having a hard time letting go? Or where is it coming from? And even if I can't in that moment get curious about it, allowing myself to go back to it later. And that I tell that to parents a lot too. 'Cause I will get asked the question, well, what do I do when I'm triggered? Most of the time, there's not much you can do in that moment, right? Except breathe and
Mhm.
try to regulate yourself, right?
Yes.
Breathing seems so simple, but it's very helpful just to get that oxygen back into your brain so you can have a rational thought.
Mhm.
But the important part of that is to just take note, right?
Mhm.
So whether you're in therapy or not, take note and get curious about it later on. Why did that particular thing feel so scary to me, or my body reacted the way that it did, or I didn't react, you
Mhm.
know?
Mhm.
Um,
I love what you're saying. It's great advice for anyone, really, parents especially. I think about Bruce Perry's regulate, reason, then
mhm,
respond. And that's really what you're
mhm.
saying. Like, just get yourself regulated, then go back and be curious. Why was I triggered? What was going on for me? And then you can decide what to do next, right?
Yeah.
Um, as we kind of come to a close, how did you begin to learn about what triggers were and kind of be in this space of really reparenting yourself and learning about trauma and how it manifests as a mom? How did you kind of come to where you are now?
Well, I mean, like I had said earlier, I just happened to stumble upon the Nadine Burke Harris talk about ACEs.
Mhm.
And I was driving home from work, and I literally had to pull over on the side of the road because it was an explanation, right,
Mhm.
for how
Mhm.
I was feeling, way outside of the realms of you're crazy. Like,
Yeah.
this was an actual physical thing that I am experiencing because of what I went through.
Yes.
And I alone am not responsible for fixing that. There are people that can help me if they know that this is what's happening to me, right? So that really kind of started the trajectory of wanting to understand more about what toxic stress does to the body. And then in my work, another little kind of Oprah whisper, I had always said I will never work residential and I will never work substance.
I
I am now working as a program director in a house that works with people with substance use disorders in mental health. So I used to get a level of frustration because a lot of the times when I went digging, looking for information about trauma recovery, stress, all this sort of stuff, a lot of it, most of it is geared towards children, right? And it's geared towards how an adult, a healthy adult, can help that child.
That's right.
Regulate. And there was nothing that I could find directly that spoke to the adult population, right? That these kids grow up.
Yes.
We're right here. And it doesn't all just go away because you grow up. And what I discovered as I went into this role as a program director, I am working with those children.
Yeah.
I'm working with those children.
That's right.
They're just older now and their wiring is stronger. And so many times we say, my team, particularly there's a couple of us that are moms, we have so many of the same conversations at home with our younger children that we have with grownups at work, right? Because they never got these messages. And it's a fine balance between we're not treating adults like children.
That's right. Yeah.
We check ourselves often to make sure that that's not a place we're coming from, but also remember that these are lessons that they were never exposed to in healthy ways. So
you're reparenting, really. You're teaching them reparenting skills. So often people ask me, Dawn, like, why do you focus on child psychology or childhood trauma? And I say, because all psychology is childhood psychology. and I love what you just said, right? That these adults that we interact with, I mean, think about like the people who listen to this podcast, healthcare professionals and physicians who've had their own trauma and are treating adults with trauma, that these are just little people who experienced adversities in the world and have grown up now and may or may not have dealt with that, been in a space to have resources, to feel safe, had access to people who would listen, looked beyond their diagnoses or medication. And like you said, just been curious about what else might be going on. So I love that you've come like to this space of sitting with adults now.
Yeah. And it's acceptable, right? It's acceptable to look at a child who is, having a tantrum of sort and not judge because they're a child, right? So that same behavior presents itself in adults who never got supported to understand their own trauma, what it did to them, right?
100%.
But that comes with an enormous amount of judgment, right?
That adult temper tantrum.
That adult temper tantrum gets things thrown at you like you don't want to change. You're manipulating the situation. Every time something's going right, you're sabotaging it. You don't really want to get better. Just put the drink down. All these kind of messages that we send the adult abused child. It's not fair. Yeah. It's not fair. And it can be preventable if you are able to educate yourself and your staff to recognize behavior as language. The staff, we didn't really get a chance to talk about that, but supporting the folks who are also helping on the front line is enormous, particularly in the mental health field, because so many of us went into the field, right? Because we have very similar experiences to those we serve. Mm-hmm. And so if we're not talking to our staff about how they're being triggered, help make them aware, help them regulate, have compassion for them, it's a vicious cycle.
Mm-hmm. I mean, first of all, we can keep talking about it more. I want to have you back on this podcast because I know that people are, listening and taking notes even as you're talking, and the compassion and empathy that come through are just palpable, Dawn. Let me try to wrap up some of our time together by doing what I call rapid fire questions at the end to kind of pull us together at the end and lighten a little bit. But what's one thing that you think people get wrong about trauma-informed work?
That we're sitting around making excuses for people, right? So I tell people often, there are explanations, they are not excuses. Okay. There are explanations why people are reacting the way that they are. We're not giving them a pass to keep acting that way, right? We're just acknowledging that it's not because they are broken or, whatever other toxic word you want to throw at them. There's actually a reason. And we're not going easy. No, it has more to do with compassion than anything else, really. Yeah.
If people hear nothing else, I mean, there's so much today in this time together, but if they hear nothing else, trauma-informed does not mean making excuses for people. It means having compassion for people. We should put that on a t-shirt and wear it around. I think you may have answered this, but I want to reiterate for listeners. If you could go back, or as a young Dawn, as a new mom, and tell her something, what would it be?
Get the expectation that you're going to have, or you're going to be, the perfect mom. Not that I was aiming to be the perfect mom, but the image of perfect mom for me was the anti of what I experienced, right? Like, get it out of your head that you're not going to be up against some of the same challenges that your own mother was up against, right? Because there's no way to avoid that. It's okay. These things are going to happen. And it's okay to talk about it, right? Doesn't mean you're a bad mom. That actually probably still to this day, I battle like bad mom, as I've learned, as my eyes have been widened to ideas of, patriarchy and misogyny and the messaging that we've received our whole lives, and women have for ever. That definitely plays into it as well. The idea of being a good mom versus a bad mom, my body reacting a certain way has nothing to do with good and bad.
Thank you for that. So this is the last question, probably the toughest. It's 11 p.m. at night and you have a food craving. What do you reach for?
Oh my God, I am a chips and dip kind of girl. Actually, last night, I broke out the chips and dip and it's so bad and I know it. But I don't know, there's just something about that combo that there's nothing better than snuggling up on the couch and binging on Netflix and just turning the volume up because I can't hear it over my own crunch.
I love that. Okay, awesome. I want to thank you, Dawn, for being here on this podcast today. This is an underscoring my belief that people with lived experience are the best experts. And I appreciate you sharing your story and your vulnerabilities and the stories of the people that you serve and the stories of other people you've written about. So we will link up to your book and your website and everything in the show notes so that people have access to it. And we'll also link up to Nadine Burke Harris's TED Talk. I've done that before, but we'll do it again because it's a game changer for so many people. But let me just say, from the bottom of my heart, you are creating less aloneness in this world. And I appreciate you for that. It's beautiful. Thank you so much.
Thank you. I really, really appreciate that. And I appreciate the opportunity. This one felt really special. This opportunity felt special for me because I've never had the opportunity to talk where I knew that medical professionals were listening. Oftentimes I speak to family services, I speak to mental health providers, and there's always been this raging gap for me, not being able to reach the medical field. Particularly because of my own experience and hindsight, seeing how primary care, how post and family planning, and then OBGYN, like all that, there's so much potential to plant seeds of awareness. And I hope that message comes through, that there's nothing big, huge that needs to be done. Just opening the door for a conversation and asking can really ultimately change a mother or father's life. And I appreciate the opportunity to say that.
Yeah, thank you.